So if you take a look here, you can see I've labeled my rails. This one here is for my TSC 55 KEB. This one is for my TS60 track saw. This one is for my TS V60 track saw. This is for my TSC 55 REB track saw. I have two of the cordless saws, and this one I use exclusively for the REB saw. This is my FS 800 rail. This is a FS 1900 rail. It is my TS 75 rail, and that's the rail that I'm actually going to be using today. This is my benchdogs.co.uk quad hinge system. We're going to put that rail onto this area here. So putting the rail on is not difficult. Basically, you have these, you have knobs up under here that you can unscrew, and then you have these T-nuts. So I'm going to loosen this up so that I can slide the rail on. You want to be careful not to loosen them so much to where the knob falls off. So I'm going to take this TS75 rail. I'm going to orient it with the cutting edge over to my left as I'm putting it on. Oh, I got to watch the garage door here. And I'm just going to lift this up and slide it in place. Now, I have not cut these rails down because I like them to stay the full length. However, that leaves me with significant overhang on the back. But it works fine. Okay, so we're all set to cut. I think I'm going to slide a little bit more towards the front because I'm actually using the TS75 saw to give me a little bit more runway. So up here on top I have my TS. So here on top I have my TS55 REB saw. Let's go ahead and get that out of the way. And this is the box for the REB. This is the TS60K. This here is the TSV60K. And here finally we've got the TS75 track saw. So let's go ahead and get that out. So at this point in the video, I have to be honest. I don't have any clue as to what I'm about to do. So I'm just randomly grabbing some of my tools and assembling them. As you can see here, I'm putting my benchdogs.co.uk fence, the long one, in place. I realize I have to move my track saw out of the way so that I can lift up the rail to do that. But here we go, bam! We're gonna smack the actual garage door track. After a bit of finagling, I finally get that in place. Then I have to come around on the other side to go ahead and get the rest of the dogs to go and get seated. So with the fence on, now I'm kind of trying to eyeball how this is going to work. I really hate having my cords and vacuum line going across the table. So at this point, I get the bright idea of throwing it up over the garage door track to make a faux boom arm. Again, mind you, all this time spent in the shop, I'm just trying to set up, trying to figure out a way to make the shop functional so that I can get to actually making something. Truth be told, I get off at around 5 p.m. Well, actually I get off work at about 4 p.m., but I get home closer to 5 p.m. in the evening. And I've mentioned before that I don't really run any power tools after 7. And as you can see here with me fumbling and finagling around, it'll be 7 o'clock before I even get to turn on a tool. Now I've decided to go ahead and use the shorter fence, and the reason being is because I'm going to be trying to cut some 2x lumber, and I don't want to have to reach all the way back to the long fence. So now I've decided that I need an outfeed for what I'm going to cut, or potentially need one. So I'm going to rearrange the room so that I can move my Festool MFT table down to the end of my home built MFT. This right here is a regular occurrence. If you wonder why I'm not quite as advanced as I could be with such high-end tools, I'm constantly doing this right here. But the good side of the situation is, by me setting up the cameras and doing this type of action, whatever you want to call it, shop shifting, I'm learning how to get better camera angles. And then right now I'm practicing doing a voiceover. Can't even speak now. All of this stuff I'm doing on the fly. At this point, my overall goal is to make 2 rolling stands for my 2 Capex saws that you can see there to the right. But in order to do that, I'm trying to set things up in a way to where I can kind of just batch through this process. I usually have more success when I don't try to set up, but it also leaves a greater mess. So here I'm just cutting off boards. Probably have some screws in the end of those boards. I'm really big on reusing wood because, you know, that's just what I do. Waste not, want not. So if I had the UG stand with the arms, I wouldn't have this problem. I can't do repeatable cuts, and you know, obviously both of the fences are not actually square to one another, so I'm just kind of winging it here. So over to my left, just out of the shot, is the CS Sys 50 table saw, and it's in my way, so I have to put the wood off to the right side of the screen to make this little cut. The other thing that I'm doing here while I'm doing this is just comparing the different saws. Obviously both the KS60 and the KS120 are new to me, so I'm just going to use them as much as I can, even if it's on menial tasks, just so I can get a better idea, so that over time I'll be able to offer up, you know, a constructive opinion as opposed to just doing an unboxing and overview. Now, one of the big things that I realized as I've been doing this woodworking journey, so I want to use 2x lumber, not because I want all my furniture or items to be built out of 2x lumber, but because I feel like wood is something that I don't want to just keep wasting. If I buy a tool and then I decide I'm not happy with the tool, I could actually return it, or I could actually sell it. Now, I've already mentioned I don't really like returning stuff, so more than likely it would be selling it, which I've not done that yet either. But since I want to use just regular 2x lumber, that puts me in a position where I have to mill these boards. That's why I bought the lunchbox planer and also my joiner. Now, I wanted to get a long bed joiner, however, it was pretty expensive, and also too, it's going to take up a lot more floor space. I think the Powermatic that I was looking at was probably about $2,400, and it only had a 6-inch cutter. Problem is too, most of those bigger jointers, you need to have 240 or 220 power in the shop, which I don't have. And that's how I originally started off with the battery platform in the first place. That's why I have battery powered table saws, is simply because if I can't keep all my tools plugged in and run them on power, then, you know, I had to find an alternative, and that alternative was to use battery powered tools. So, and for those that didn't watch my videos in the past and don't know, before I bought my Festool table saw, I purchased, I can't remember if I bought the DeWalt or the Milwaukee first, doesn't really matter. But the reason why I bought the two, the Milwaukee gives you the ability to run a dado stack, which is beneficial. And on the flip side of that coin, the DeWalt FlexVolt miter saw has the ability to run with a cord, so it's actually dual powered. Now, when I bought my FlexVolt tools, there was actually some rumor that there was going to actually be a adapter for that FlexVolt table saw, which never came to market. And then also I found out that from another woodworker on YouTube that they were using the AC adapter on their saw, and they've actually replaced the motor on their FlexVolt miter saw like at least twice. Now, I haven't had any problems because I've only plugged that accessory into my FlexVolt miter saw like one time. I usually just use the batteries. But on the other end, the Milwaukee saw that you see behind me, it's already pretty much gone bad. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do with that in the long run. Right now, it's just kind of like a backdrop accessory. And it's kind of got me perplexed because I wanted to have a background platform. And the reason for that is if I'm able to buy, like, say, a small piece of land somewhere, I'd like to go on that piece of land and actually practice doing things like, you know, I would like dig out the ground, you know, practice pouring me a small little foundation and, you know, doing all that kind of basic construction stuff, build like a small little building, you know, following code closely just to get a feel for how to do that type of work and, you know, tear it down afterwards. But basically, I would love to get that kind of hands-on practice because I've mentioned before, I learn best through hands-on. And that's why I kind of have this combination of more fine finished carpentry tools, but then also just regular construction tools. Now, as far as choosing a backup platform, I would say, you know, at first I was leaning more towards the Milwaukee, but of course, as you know, Milwaukee just came to market with their track saw. So that kind of pushed me more towards the direction of like the DeWalt or even the Makita. Now, I'm less familiar with Makita, so I was leaning more towards DeWalt, but there's so many tools in the Milwaukee line that I find intriguing, and a lot of their, like, say, their 18-volt nail guns are rated a little bit higher than DeWalt's. DeWalt's have that flywheel action, and I don't have any DeWalt nail guns. I bought all Makita. All Milwaukee. And so that's why I was hoping for a better experience with Milwaukee's woodworking tools. I won't be changing out my automotive equipment though, because I really like using my M12 ratchets and impacts and all that. Even my M18 impacts, those, you know, have served me very well. Now, if you look at that saw up there at the top, that cutoff saw, the only reason why I bought that saw was, I mean, obviously I wanted to try it out and see what it was like, but the reason why I bought it was because there was a sale, and for $5.99 it came with two 12 amp hour batteries, and that's what I use with my M12 miter saw, my M18 miter saw, and also my M18 table saw. Now, as I'm doing here, I'm just practicing, you know, cutting off one end and then cutting my boards to length. And I'm using, as you can see, a 2x4 in the front and in the back to keep the rail up to the proper height. once you get this dialed in, you know, with repeatable cuts, it's really nice. I just have to figure out how to mill boards more effectively. That's a skill that I'm still practicing with. So I have the Festool CT48 Auto Clean Dust Extractor, and I also have a rigid shop vac, but I do not have like a real dust collection system, and that goes back to me only having 120 volt power in the shop, and then also only having really one outlet, or one, I guess, what is it, one fuse or whatever. But basically all the outlets seem to be on one breaker, so it's very easy to trip the breaker. So there again is why, you know, I run a lot of battery tools. I haven't had any problems with my corded track saws, or using my track saw or Capex with my Festool dust extractor. But it's when I get to running, like if I want to try to use the rigid shop vac and the planer, or the rigid shop vac and the Rikon jointer, then typically I can trip the breaker. Now I can run the planer by itself, I can run the jointer by itself, and that just makes for a huge mess in the shop. And so when I do those actions, typically there's a lot of time spent in cleanup, or I'll just do those actions and then I'll leave it for maybe a day or two and then come back and clean it afterwards. Now, obviously the problem with that is, you know, a messy shop is not a shop you really want to be moving about in. But then the other thing is, because I have not become polished in milling my boards, I'll spend maybe a whole, you know, session in the shop using the joiner and the planer, and then coming back and looking at my board and it's still not square or straight, because a lot of these 2x boards end up warping and twisting terribly. Or I'll get to milling the board and next thing you know, it'll be like, you know, you're talking about a 2x4 being like a ½ inch thick after all the milling, which kind of makes the board less useful for other functions. So in the process of me practicing, I like muscle memory, and once I do things over and over again, then it becomes second nature. And I don't get as much time as I would like to just come out here and do what I'm doing now, which is just making cuts. I'm not necessarily going to get to my final goal. Well, I'm not in this video, but what I'm doing is I'm creating that muscle memory, the cutting off the rough edge of the board, flipping the board with the and then put it up against the stock to perform the action of getting my boards to proper length. Now here, I actually saw a guy on YouTube who took a 2x4. He built a nice little project, and he cut his boards down so that he could get them to where he could actually basically joint the board in half. Because if I plane the board down, I'm losing a whole lot of wood. But if I cut the 2x4 narrow enough on the 3.5 inch length of the board, then I can actually turn it on its vertical end and split the board, and then I'll have two even sides that I could either then run through the planer to make sure they're perfectly matching as far as in their thickness, and then I could either use that to glue up to make boards, or I could use that to make wood frames. Because if you just use the full 2x4, then there's no way to split them in half. Now I could use that bandsaw that I have, but the capacity is just barely enough to cut through a 2x4, and it doesn't have a fence. So then I would need to kind of construct some kind of fence to make sure that that cut was as straight as it can possibly be in milling the boards. Because you could look right there at the edge of the board. It's kind of cocked up there at the right of the screen, And that's the issue I've been having, or what I've learned in my journey. So I have all these nice tools, but there's still some fundamental areas that I need to get a lot of practice in to actually start making higher quality things. Now, obviously, if you decide to just run with plywood, then you don't have to worry so much about milling wood and getting things to be square. On the flip side of that, plywood is a lot heavier and it's definitely a lot more expensive than dealing with 2x lumber. So I don't know if this is actually a great approach to learning woodworking. I can say that it has slowed down my actual growth, because basically, you know, as I'm working with this 2x lumber, I'm spending so much time just trying to learn how to get it milled properly. And once I do get that down, though, you know, I think I can really start to advance in my woodworking. That's why you don't see me doing as many videos, whether it be with dominoes or dowels, or I even have a dovetail jig somewhere in the shop. It's because I'm trying to get straight flat boards. Now, I have considered just going the plywood route, and actually I even, you know, kind of cheaped out, because in some ways, I mean, I may be buying expensive tools, but in a lot of ways I'm kind of cheap. So I tried to make French cleats out of CDX plywood, and you know, it doesn't look good, obviously, but then also too, I got a lot of splintering. The boards were actually kind of warped, so when I ran them through the table saw, the actual 45-degree angle didn't come out super nice and clean. That's just a lesson learned. You know, same thing when I was making the CDX cabinet. It was meant to just be a learning exercise, but the performance and the actual structure of the wood is not adequate for making decent looking furniture. I thought I could just basically use it to learn, but in actuality, it's actually making the process a lot more difficult. Now, when I bought the Veritas dowel maker, I thought I would just throw some 2x4 lumber in there and actually make some dowels. It didn't work out as I had planned, and one of the people that watched the video basically said that I need to kind of back off on the blade and take off less material. Now, I was just following the directions according to what was on the actual Veritas machine, so I need to try that recommendation to see if I can actually make dowels out of 2x4, because that will make it cheap. I did buy a little bit of hardwood from Home Depot, and I almost fell out of my chair because it's like $100 and something for some very small pieces, which is ridiculous. But you know, you live, you learn. And I actually ran a piece of poplar through that Veritas dowel maker, and it just chewed it all the way up. So I didn't see any difference between using 2x lumber and the Veritas dowel maker. So I do plan on continuing to practice with that, and that's been the process for me. You know, I'm doing a lot of things where I'll try something, and you know, I'm not under any kind of tutelage or learning from anyone. I'm just trying to figure this stuff out myself. And a lot of times when you're trying to figure something out yourself, it takes a lot longer to learn. It's just a fact. But I'm hoping to have the satisfaction of working through these challenges myself and eventually coming out the other side. One of the biggest challenges I have to working in the shop is the fact that during the week, my day starts at I get up at about 4 a.m. and I usually leave for work around about 4:45 in the morning. Now, I don't start at that time. I get to work pretty early, and I get off at about 4 p.m. Don't usually get home till close to 5. And so that's not giving me a whole lot of time to work in the shop. So, I mean, the whole process is just going to take a lot longer, but I feel like I've got a head start on retirement if I ever make it there, you know, because I would have built my shop while I'm gainfully employed. And when I become older and maybe have more of a fixed income, there will be a lot of things that I'll already have in my shop. There's a lot of woodworkers on YouTube that I realize have had tools handed down to them, have had skills handed down to them. That's not my case. I'm building out my woodworking skills on my own with no formal training. All I'm doing is practicing. I'm trialing and failing. And on top of that, I never did video before the last 2 years. I'm learning how to do video. I'm learning how to do audio. You know, all of these things I'm trying to do at the same time while maintaining my home, managing my home, and just taking care of responsibilities that I have to take care of. But anyways, guys, I'm about done with this particular video, and I will see you in my next one. Take care.